Hey, what's up guys? We're back again with another video, and today we have the first A tier dungeon of our Dungeons and Review series, Mists of Tirna Scithe. For those who don't know, Mists of Tirna Scithe is a linear dungeon, but I would describe it as linear similar to how Underrot is linear, where there is a very structured aspect of how you're going to end up completing this dungeon. You have to kind of go through a certain path, but there are a large amount of choices that you can make in regards to like the trash you pull, which pathways you are taking, and like allowing you to actually ultimately skip some trash, because if you actually pull all the trash in the dungeon, you're gonna be at like some insane amount. But there's like multiple walkways they're able to go through, and it's linear the same way that Underrot is linear. And I feel like that's just the best way to be able to even describe it. So jumping straight into it, let's talk about why I gave Mists of Tirna Scithe an A tier ranking, and ultimately talk about some of the upsides that helps push it into that spot. So, like I said, it's linear like Underrot, meaning that there are multiple pathways that you can take where you're able to get 100% of your count without a rogue skip. I feel like that's a pretty important aspect of a dungeon to me. I feel like that shroud skips and like death skips and stuff like that can be encouraged, and at times can be the best strategy, but I feel like if you feel like you're shoehorned into those because you are otherwise going to go over trash count substantially, then that becomes a little bit weird. Mists of Tirna Scithe is fairly open-ended, especially on the back half of the dungeon, to what you're able to actually pull. Basically all the trash after Mistcaller, you can kind of determine how you're going to end up pulling all that stuff, in like how much count you want to be able to grab along the way, because there are multiple routes that you are able to take. The first half of the dungeon, especially if you have a Night Fae in your group, a little bit less so if you don't have a Night Fae in your group, but especially if you do have a Night Fae in your group, you're able to skip a large amount of the trash just by naturally walking by all of it in the first area, which is, to me, a pretty large benefit. Some more aspects of the trash that I feel like propel this dungeon to keep it really interesting is the maze mechanic kind of keeps stuff fresh, and for me increases the replayability of the dungeon. And at the same time, it's going to be 96 count per run during the dungeon. I think that balance, and the balance of engaging trash and like fun inconsequential mobs, like we've talked about for some other dungeons, is very strong in Mists of Tirna Scithe. There are some casters, there's like mist callers even, that require heals, and there are some casters, especially after Mistcaller himself, the boss, that require kicks. However, they are not an overwhelming majority in this dungeon, and I feel like casters that require a large amount of kicks or coordinated stops is really daunting for a lot of players, including myself even. Like, just having to coordinate that much becomes a little bit more on the tedious end and a little bit less on the fun end. Where in Mists of Tirna Scithe, there are a large amount of mobs that, while some of them do require kicks, it's not like the most amount of trash that you're going to be fighting. There's a lot of trash that does not require kicks, and there's a lot of trash that has interesting mechanics that have just been done well, that don't you don't have to just like set up a kick rotation. So I feel like the balance of interesting versus tedious is really strong in this dungeon, and it lends itself to more interesting trash because of it. So aside from the trash and the layout of this dungeon, I feel like a 3-boss dungeon is more often than not shorter and more of a trash focused dungeon as a whole, which more often than not is going to be something that I prefer. I don't know about other people, but I end up preferring somewhere in like the 30 to 35 minute range of a dungeon. Not normally a little bit shorter, but like 30 to 35 minutes is normally my sweet spot. And then fewer bosses is typically, I enjoy fewer bosses more than more bosses, and I think that the more engaging trash to me is what makes Mythic Plus feel like Mythic Plus. Like doing the AoE damage, doing the like chain pulling of trash packs, that kind of stuff is what normally ends up making Mythic Plus feel like Mythic Plus to me. And so a 3-boss instance like Mists of Tirna Scithe, where it's going to be more trash focused and a shorter dungeon because of it, is something that I am much more interested in. Obviously, opinions can vary wildly on that one, though. So the next thing, and what really kind of drives it home for me, is the bosses are awesome as well. Ingrid and Mistcaller have elements of the trash that come before them. Ingrid and Mistcaller are the first and second bosses. Have elements of the trash that come before them that are integrated fairly seamlessly into the bosses and kind of make the dungeon feel like it flows together as a whole. Like, just the whole entire dungeon feels like it flows together. Like, you do a bunch of trash that's related to Ingrid prior to engaging in the first boss, where you end up having to fight like these big tree people, and they end up giving you like a tranquility buff. Then once you get to Ingrid, you end up having to kill the tree, and then the tree will end up giving Ingrid, or it will like target Ingrid with its, I don't even know, hands, and give you a damage increase buff and break its lightning shield on that fight. I think that fight may end up may be subject to issues with like tyrannical, but as it currently stands and how I've tested it on the beta, I haven't had too many issues with the lightning shield. I'm not a huge fan of lightning shield mechanics, especially with how it's difficult to deal with Ingrid's lightning shield if you don't have enough damage. So maybe I have to revisit this later and talk about the problems of tyrannical on that fight. But as it currently stands, I do genuinely think that this fight is sick, especially with the current pacing of that boss. Mistcaller, on the other hand, you end up having like these phases where Mistcaller will break up into 4 other bosses, and you have to do the elements of the maze where you were deciding which is the odd man out, and you end up having to kill the odd man out on the Mistcaller boss. And I think that that's done really well. Beyond that, Mistcaller is not even the most engaging fight. You have to like dodge that Vulpine Fox, which will otherwise ice block you, dodge the dodgeball, kick patty cake if you're the tank, that kind of stuff. But like the mechanics that are important on Mistcaller, which are the illusions, are super, super interesting. And I actually think they're very well designed. The final boss, which is Tredova, has probably one of the most interesting mechanics in all of Dungeons, which it's related to how the dodges work, because basically Tredova learns how you dodge and will end up spawning more and more slime based on how you dodged previous attempts. And I suspect that this is going to be a pug killer until like a more refined strategy is going to be developed for Tredova. But like the easiest strategy that I have noticed for Tredova is that if you constantly keep moving in a circle, you can't get hit twice with a hit twice with a puddle, because Tredova, like, you're not, basically it's X and Y coordinate. It's X and Y coordinate specific to how he's going to end up shooting out his goop. But if you're moving in a circle, you're moving differently on the X and Y plane every single time, if that makes any sense. I may be just very poorly describing how you dodge Tredova, but anyways, I think that this boss may be pug killer. I think that the boss is super sick though. Mistcaller and Tredova both have that problem of where I think that they're going to be a little bit rough on pugs, especially early on. Once people start getting better, once people start getting better at the boss, it will be a little bit easier. But early on, I suspect that these 2 fights are going to be more complicated for other players. But Tredova, I think, as a gimmick and as a boss, is very good. Like, I think I got out in the weeds there a little bit, but I think circling back, I think this is a very well-designed fight. Okay, so where's some of the deductions of points for me in this dungeon? I think that the only real serious deduction that I end up having for this one is due to the checkpoints in the dungeon and like the skip at the beginning. Both of those being gated behind Night Fae feels, I don't know, bad. I guess for a lack of better words. I don't really have any better way of describing it. It ends up feeling just very poor, because like that checkpoint at the very beginning of the dungeon is actually really important to determining like the openness of the dungeon and the pathing that you're actually going to end up taking. The checkpoints are basically the difference in having the checkpoints and not is very, very high because of like how long your run back would otherwise be. So I think that those 2 things, and just like the Night Fae Covenant specific dungeon buff for Mists of Tirna Scithe, are really, really stupid because of it. Like the damage buffs are almost even whatever to me, but the checkpoints are bad. I think that if you were able to open the gate to the left and then have checkpoints after the first and second boss, like you previously were able to, before they implemented the dungeon specific or the Covenant specific dungeon buffs, the dungeon would have probably been an S tier for me. But without those things, it's a hard sell to even propel it into the S tier, because like you're going to be ultimately lacking in some areas. So those are all the real downsides that I had for the dungeon. As for things that I would change about the dungeon, there's this I don't even know what it is. Maybe this would actually be a downside, but there's this deal with the maze right now where there are 3 different mini bosses inside of the maze. There's like a frog, a hydra, and I don't actually know what the third one is. It's some mob. I don't really remember anymore. There's a frog, a hydra, and then some other mob. And the variants inside the maze, you're like always going to be at 96 count whenever you go through the maze, so you can path yourself appropriately. But the difference in mini bosses, while it's not apparent currently on the beta, it may end up being apparent once like you actually start doing relevant content or relevant keys, where one of them is substantially easier and or faster than the other 2, where you just end up hoping that you get one of them because you're going to be able to just like deal with that one substantially quicker. And I worry that that's going to happen because I do like the flavor of the maze, and I would hate for it to be kind of tainted by these mini bosses, because as it currently stands, it's 7 doors every single time. It's 96% or it's 96 count on the whole dungeon, so it's very easy to predict. So there being some level of RNG with which mob you get between the frog, the hydra, and then third dude is not great, especially for like, I don't know. I don't want to even like mention MDI stuff, but like for Mythic Plus, which is a competitive game mode, it feels a bit wonky that you're not in control over what mini boss you can get, and sometimes that can end up saving you a substantial amount of time. It's yet to be seen, but something that I would probably change just on my own. Beyond that, the only other thing I would change is like the downside of the dungeon, which is like the checkpoint / gates that are open at the very beginning. Like those things should be uniform across the whole entire dungeon. Those shouldn't be added bonuses by having a Night Fade to your group. That should just be part of the default dungeon. And those are the only 2 things that I really can think that I would actually change about the dungeon. The high points of this dungeon are really high. Like I think again, the feel of the trash as a whole and the general trash's engagement to like how tedious it is balance in regards to that is just unparalleled. Very unique bosses that do very cool things that I'm super interested in. Maybe other people aren't. And then it being a 3 boss dungeon kind of pushes it also more into that camp. How Theater of Pain being a 5 boss dungeon kind of made it lose points because I'm not like super into epic fucking boss dungeons. I'm more into epic trash dungeons. It's the same reason that Mists of Tirna Scithe being a 3 boss dungeon is going to be a little bit higher because of that. So that is going to about do it for me here today. That will be our Mists of Tirna Scithe video review, why I gave this an A tier ranking. I hope you guys did enjoy the video. Comment down below if you guys have anything that you would like to see differently. What are your guys' general thoughts on Mists of Tirna Scithe? Are you as excited about this dungeon as I am? I think that there's a lot of unique stuff with this dungeon, particularly the maze, particularly the bosses. There's just a lot of cool shit with this dungeon. And I'm super excited to play this one. Tomorrow, we're going to have Halls of Atonement, which was the only S-tier dungeon. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of like what really made that an S-tier dungeon and kind of what pushed that over the top over all the rest of the stuff. So that will be that. Check back here tomorrow. Like, comment, and subscribe, all that YouTube normal shit. And that'll be it. So I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys tomorrow.